The Supercarrier's bridge lights died before anyone touched a switch. Commander Zarvok felt the deck hum change under his boots, a wrongness he could not name. One heartbeat. The tactical display showed the Imperator's wrath sitting at the center of the fleet. The next heartbeat, the ship holding that display was simply gone. Not damaged, not burning. Gone. His four hands moved across the console faster than thought, hunting for a signal, a fragment, anything the sensors could hold on to. The screen gave him nothing. No debris field. No distress call. No wreckage tumbling in the dark where a mountain of Durasteel had floated a moment before. Then every display on every ship in the fleet blinked the same two words at once. No signal. The whole fleet. One error, arriving everywhere at the same instant, as if the universe itself had reached out and erased a single line from its own record. "Report," Zarvok said, and his voice came out smaller than he meant it to. The sensor officer beside him only shook his head. There was nothing to report. That was the report. Zarvok turned toward the command chair, where Admiral Vexerin should have been sitting, going over the invasion timeline one final time before the jump. The chair was empty. The Imperator's wrath, the finest vessel in the Empire, carrying the Admiral who had never lost a single battle in his long command, had vanished between 1 second and the next, in the middle of its own fleet, with no one firing a single shot. Somewhere above the tactical deck, an alert chime kept sounding, over and over, for a ship that no longer existed to hear it. I wish I could tell you the silence ended there. It didn't. Stay close, and I'll tell you why it never had a chance to end at all. 6 hours earlier, the vote had already been cast. The conclave chamber on Citadel Primaris had stood since before any species in the room could agree on a calendar, its walls cut from obsidian pulled from the heart of a dead star. The air smelled of ozone and sweet spice, of the metallic tang carnivore delegates carried with them, and of the burnt sugar incense the Torvani burned before every vote. Thousands of seats rose in rings around the dais, one ring for every species that had clawed its way through the galaxy's long, cruel history. Admiral Vexerin stood alone at the center of it, bronze skin catching the cool blue light that fell through the crystal dome above. He touched the small crystal at his throat, a habit older than most of the delegates watching him. "Humanity is a minor power," he said, and the chamber's ancient acoustics carried his voice to every seat. "No fleet of consequence. Sector 7 Omega holds resources that would feed our expansion for generations, and we have let it sit untouched for 287 years, on the word of one elder who claims to have seen something she cannot describe." He turned to face the pale. "A defensive doctrine built on outdated ideas about borders, seated shape of elder theory, the oldest living being in known space. That is not policy," Vexerin said. "That is superstition. Theory did not rise. She had not risen in years." She simply spoke from her seat in the highest ring, her voice thin but steady. "You are making a mistake, Admiral. The humans have not been quiet because they are weak. They have been quiet because they are patient." The vote was called. Hand after hand rose in agreement. Ring after ring, until the tally came back overwhelming. The invasion was approved. Vexerin did not smile. He simply turned and walked from the chamber, already thinking about supply lines. Theory watched him go and said nothing more. Beside her, Commander Zarvok, young then, still new to the Admiral's staff, kept his doubts folded behind a still face, the way he always did. On Earth, the declaration arrived in the smallest hours of the morning. Admiral Yuki Marchetti had already been awake a while, which was her habit whether the galaxy needed her or not. She read the transmission once, sitting at her kitchen table with a ceramic mug in her hand, a hairline crack running down its side that she had never bothered to fix. She set the mug down without finishing it. "Commander Vance," she said, and her voice carried exactly as far as it needed to, and no farther. "Wake the Phantom." Elias Vance had been waiting for that sentence for most of his adult life. He touched the photograph propped against his console, the Cascade Mountains where he had grown up, and did not look away from it right away. "Protocol active, Admiral," he said. "All nodes report ready." "We've been ready a long time." Lieutenant Sana Okonkwo reached into her pocket without looking and moved her grandmother's white chess piece 1 careful centimeter to the right, the way she did before anything that mattered. "The fleet's assembling at the Helios jump point," she said. 2,847 ships. Their flagship is the Imperator's Wrath, a mountain of hull, more crew aboard than most cities carry people. It's the best they have. Marchetti folded her hands on the table. Her wedding ring, worn thin with age, caught the kitchen light. "Thank you, Lieutenant." She looked toward the wall screen, where Chief Engineer Mikhail Volkov's face waited, faint grease still on his collar from whatever he'd been repairing an hour ago. "Mikhail's status, displacement field is nominal, Admiral," Volkov said. "Let's go wake them up properly." Across the orbital watch station, Sergeant Marcus Webb double-checked the last of the perimeter sensors and thought, not for the first time. His cybernetic eye clicked as it focused. 12 seconds from command to full activation. They won't see it coming. They won't see anything at all. Marchetti nodded once. She did not raise her voice. She never did. "Good," she said. Beside him, Cadet Priya Sharma poured the last of her instant coffee into a chipped mug that read "World's Okay, Mom," watched the readiness board flip from amber to green across every station at once, and said to no one in particular that this was a strange way to spend a morning that had started like every other one, except that this time his grandfather's dog tags felt heavier under his collar than usual, though nothing about their weight had changed. "I really thought we'd have more warning than this." No one answered her. There wasn't time. The Imperial fleet crossed into Sector 7 Omega, expecting silence and an easy conquest. What they found instead was a defense network that had been built in the dark spaces between worlds for generations, designed from its very first node to be invisible to every sensor the Empire owned. Aboard the lead cruiser, Commander Zarvok had inherited command of a fleet that no longer had an admiral, and he was not about to announce that out loud. He gave the order to press forward. Retreat, without a body, without wreckage, without even a cause to report, would end his career faster than any battle could. "Formation holding," his tactical officer said. "No hostile contacts. No emissions of any kind from the target sector." "Keep watching anyway," Zarvok said. Deep below the fleet's outer screen, a single sensor buoy blinked awake, logged the formation's exact position, mass, and heading, and went dark again before anything aboard the Imperial ships noticed it had ever been listening. On Earth, Volkov watched the same data arrive on his own display, half a second behind the buoy's transmission. "They're inside the outer marker," he said. "The whole fleet near enough. Admiral, they still don't know we can see them." "Let them get comfortable," Marchetti said. Okonkwo's console chimed softly, a routine proximity alert, the kind that fired a dozen times a day and meant nothing. She glanced at it out of habit and stopped moving. "That's not routine," she said. "Admiral, one of our own outer buoys just went silent. Not damaged, not destroyed." It stopped transmitting 1 full second before the Imperial fleet's lead ship passed directly over it, like something reached out and turned it off first. Vance looked up sharply from his console. "We didn't do that." Nobody in the room answered him. Marchetti set her cup down again, slower this time, and did not touch it a third time that morning. Far ahead of the fleet, deep inside Sector 7 Omega, something in the dark between the stars had already begun counting ships. Zarvok did not report the buoy sighting. There was nothing solid enough to report, and a fleet without an admiral did not need one more reason to doubt its commander. He held formation and pushed deeper into the sector, watching a starfield that gave back nothing but silence. The silence was the wrong detail. A fleet this size crossing hostile territory should have drawn some response by now. A patrol, a warning shot, a single hailed transmission demanding they turn back. Instead, the sector simply let them in, the way a held breath lets in cold air. An hour into the advance, the Verona, a support cruiser trailing near the fleet's edge, stopped answering its comm checks. "Verona, report status." "Nothing." "Verona, respond." Zarvok pulled its last telemetry onto his display. "Engines nominal. Hull intact." Crew stations all showing green a moment before the feed cut clean, as if someone had reached over and turned a page. No debris, no wreckage, no final scream over the channel. Just a ship that had been there, and then was a gap in the formation where a ship used to be. Aboard the Verona, a young weapons officer named Dreth had kept a small carved stone from his home moon clipped inside his collar for every deployment of his short career, a habit his mother had started for him before his first flight. When the displacement field folded around the Verona, the stone folded with it. Somewhere half a galaxy away, his mother would keep wearing the matching one on a cord around her own neck for years, without ever learning why her son's ship had simply stopped answering. Zarvok said nothing to the rest of the fleet. He logged the loss as a communications failure and kept the formation moving forward. because stopping now, in front of crews already unsettled by a missing admiral, would cost more than one cruiser was worth. On Earth, Okonkwo watched the same loss register on her display half a second after it happened. The way she had watched the buoy go dark, she did not celebrate it. She simply noted the time, moved her grandmother's chess piece another careful centimeter, and kept her eyes on the board. "That's 2, she said quietly, to no one. "They haven't noticed the pattern yet." Marchetti stood behind her, arms folded, watching the same display without expression. "They will." Vance looked up from his own station, his voice lower than usual. "The moment we start explaining ourselves, we've already lost the point." Far above the planet, in orbit, Ambassador Helena Chen watched the same feed from a private terminal aboard Earth's diplomatic relay station. "Admiral, at this rate of advance, they'll reach the inner defense line inside the day. Do we hold Phantom back, or do we let them keep finding out the hard way?" "We let the sector do the talking," Marchetti said. Alone except for the framed photograph of her grandchildren propped against her console. She had spent generations being told, politely and then not so politely, that her seat at the conclave was a courtesy and not a right. She read the casualty count as it updated, one line at a time, and felt something she had not let herself feel in all those years of being dismissed. She did not feel triumph, she felt tired. "They're going to make us do this the whole way through, aren't they?" she said to the empty room. Nobody answered her. The photograph of her grandchildren did not move, and she found herself glad in a small useless way that they would never have to sit in a chamber and be told their species did not count. Back at the conclave, Elder Theory sat through the recess between sessions with her eyes closed, though she was not sleeping. A junior aide approached her with a data slate, hesitated, and finally spoke. "Elder, there are reports the Imperial fleet has lost contact with several vessels. The Council is calling it a communications anomaly. It is not an anomaly," Theory said, without opening her eyes. "It is a pattern." "Anomalies happen once. Should I inform the Council? Inform them?" Theory said. "They will not listen. They did not listen the first time, and they did not listen the second, but inform them anyway. Someone should be able to say, later, that they were told." The aide left. Thyri remained where she was, hands folded in her lap, the only person in the chamber who understood that the war the Empire thought it was fighting had already been decided 287 years ago, on a day nobody else in that room had bothered to remember. 3 more ships went silent over the following hour, spaced apart, never in a pattern the Imperial sensors could isolate. Zarvok stopped logging them as failures and started logging them as something he did not have a word for. His tactical officer, a steady Torvani veteran named Ovresh, who had served under several admirals, finally broke the silence between them. "Commander, at this rate we will lose a full company before we reach visual range of anything worth shooting at." "I am aware," Zarvok said. "Then may I ask what you intend to do about it?" Zarvok looked at the tactical display, at the small, growing constellation of gaps where ships used to be, and found that he did not have an answer that would not sound like fear. He gave the only order he had left. "We keep moving forward. An empire does not turn back because the dark is quiet." On Earth, Volkov leaned back from his console for the first time in hours and rubbed at the socket around his cybernetic eye, an old habit from before the eye had ever needed rubbing. "Admiral, Phantom's holding steady. No strain on the field, no degradation. We could keep this up for a week if we had to." "We won't need a week," Marchetti said. Sergeant Webb, monitoring the outer perimeter from the watch station, caught something on his board that made him sit forward. "Admiral, I've got new movement, not from the Imperial fleet. Something inside the sector, moving toward the forward edge of the field." Marchetti's head turned, slow and deliberate, the first sign of real attention she had shown all morning. "Define something," she said. Webb checked his readings twice before he answered, because the numbers did not want to make sense the first time he looked at them. "I don't know yet, Admiral. It isn't one of ours. And it isn't one of theirs either." The room went quiet in a way it had not gone quiet since the declaration first arrived. Zarvok, unaware of what Earth had just picked up on its own sensors, made the only call left to a commander running out of options. He ordered a forward scout element, a tight squadron under Ovresh's direct command, to push ahead of the main formation and find whatever was swallowing his fleet one vessel at a time. "Better to lose a squadron searching for an answer than to keep losing single ships to no answer at all." "Copy, Commander," Ovresh said. "We'll find it." The scout element pulled away from the main body, engines bright against the dark, in tight formation, cutting a clean line toward the heart of the sector. For a while their telemetry came back steady. Then, without a flicker of warning, without a single alarm firing first, every signal dropped from the board at once, not one at a time. All of them, together, in the same breath. Zarvok stared at the empty space on his display where a formation had been a moment before. Around him, the bridge crew had gone very still. The particular stillness of people trying not to be the first to say what everyone was already thinking. Commander, his sensor officer finally said, "That's the whole squadron. Gone in the same instant. There's no explosion pattern to match ships breaking apart. No wreckage. No signal. It's exactly like the Verona, exactly like the flagship." Zarvok thought of Ovresh, who had served long and asked good questions and would never ask another one again. He did not let it show on his face. He had learned that much from Vexerin, if nothing else. "Hold formation," Zarvok said. "Nobody else moves ahead of the main body. Not until I say so." Nobody argued with him this time. On Earth, the loss registered on Okunwu's display in the same instant it happened, a fresh cluster of gaps appearing in the Imperial formation at once. She did not move her chess piece for this one. She just watched the numbers change and felt the weight of what a whole squadron meant, even to people who had built their whole careers around not feeling it. "That's not us," Volkov said suddenly, before anyone asked. "Admiral, I need to be clear. Phantom didn't do that. Our field doesn't work in a burst like that. It's gradual. It's contact-triggered. Something took out a whole squadron at once, and it wasn't anything I built." The room turned toward him. Marchetti's expression did not change, but something behind her eyes did. "Then what did?" she asked. Volkov had no answer, and for a man who had spent a career always having an answer, the silence that followed was worse than anything he could have said. Sergeant Webb's unidentified contact had not moved since he first flagged it. It sat at the leading edge of the sector, motionless, unregistered by any system on Earth or, as far as anyone could tell, by any system belonging to the Empire either. It was not part of the Phantom network. It was not one of the old defense platforms left over from the sector's early construction. It matched nothing in generations of records. "Admiral," Webb said carefully, "whatever that thing is, it was there before we activated Phantom. It might have been there before the Conclave ever voted." Marchetti looked at the unmarked shape on the display for a long moment, the same stillness in her that had carried her through every version of this morning so far. "Keep watching it," she said. "Don't touch it. Don't acknowledge it. And don't tell anyone outside this room that we don't know what it is, because the one thing worse than an empire finding out humanity had a weapon it didn't understand was humanity finding out the same thing about itself." The unmarked shape on Webb's display moved for the first time in an hour, and it moved directly into the Imperial fleet's path. Zarvok saw it a moment later than Earth did, a faint distortion against the star field that his sensors kept trying and failing to classify. It did not fire. It did not hail them. It simply sat there, ahead of the lead ships, like a door someone had left standing open in the dark. "Identify it," Zarvok ordered. "Unable, Commander. It isn't broadcasting anything. It isn't even reflecting light the way it should." On Earth, Volkov finally leaned in close enough to his display that his nose nearly touched it, running the shape's faint signature against every archive he had access to. Then his shoulders dropped, not with alarm, but with something closer to recognition. "Admiral, I know what that is," he said. "It's not a new system. It's an old one. First-generation Phantom hardware, one of the very first nodes ever built, out at the edge of the network where nobody's run maintenance in decades. It's not supposed to still be active. It's not supposed to still be there. But it is," Marchetti said. "It is! And it's doing exactly what it was built to do a long time before either of us had this job. Nobody had told it to wake up. Nobody had told it to stop. It had simply been waiting, the way the whole network had been waiting, for as long as it took." Zarvok did not have Volkov's answer. All he had was a fleet that would not stop shrinking, and a shape ahead of him that refused to be anything he could name. He gave the order to hold at range and route around it, and for the first time since the flagship vanished, he heard something in his own voice that sounded like fear rather than command. His pilot, a young Vrethkai officer barely out of training, spoke without waiting to be asked. "Commander, permission to say what everyone's thinking." Denied. Zarvok said, "Then, quieter, say it anyway. We should turn around." Zarvok looked at the shrinking formation on his display, at the gaps where ships used to be, at the silent shapes sitting in their path like a held breath given a shape. "Try it," he said. "Order your ship to jump." The pilot's hands moved across her console. The drive spun up, reached full charge, and delivered nothing. No jump, no error. Just a system that hummed at full readiness and refused to fold space the way it always had. "Commander, the drive isn't responding. It's charged. It should work." "Try another ship," Zarvok said, already knowing the answer. Several more attempts came back the same. Something had reached into every jump drive in the fleet, and quietly, patiently, turned off the only door out. Word spread through the fleet faster than Zarvok could contain it. Crews that had spent the whole advance in disciplined silence began breaking into open channels, demanding answers nobody had. On the bridge of a troop transport near the formation's rear, a young ensign froze mid-sentence in front of his own crew, unable to finish an order he no longer believed. Word of that, too, spread. Zarvok cut every open channel himself, one at a time, until the fleet's chatter dropped back to silence. It was not calm. It was the particular quiet of people too frightened to keep talking. For a moment, nothing more happened. No new ship vanished. No new alarm sounded. The fleet sat motionless in the dark, the whole formation with nowhere left to go. And for the first time in hours, Zarvok let himself breathe. It did not last. On Earth, Admiral Marchetti reset the small silver watch on her wrist, a motion she made once a day without needing to look at it, the same motion she had made every morning for more years than most of the people in the room had been alive. It was not a large gesture. Nobody in the room noticed her do it. She did it anyway, the way she always did, and turned back to the display. "Phantom's final stage just engaged," Vance reported, reading the numbers off his own console. "Every jump drive inside the sector boundary is locked. They came in. They can't leave. That was always the plan," Marchetti said. Sanaa Okonkwo moved her grandmother's chess piece all the way to the edge of the board, further than she had ever moved it before, and did not bring it back. Aboard the Imperial flagship's sister vessel, now the closest thing the fleet had to a command ship, Commander Zarvok gathered what remained of his senior officers in a room that had held twice as many people the day before. Nobody spoke about the empty chairs. "We are cut off," he told them, plainly because there was no version of the truth gentle enough to soften it. No enemy in sight. No warning before it happened. No way out now that it has. Nobody answered him. Nobody needed to. It was Cadet Priya Sharma, back on Earth, who finally said the number out loud, quietly, mostly to herself, the first thing she had said in over an hour of silent monitoring. "We've taken out a third of their fleet," she said, staring at the tally updating on her screen, "and they still haven't seen a single one of us." Marchetti heard her from across the room. She did not correct the number. She did not need to. "Not yet," she said. "But they're about to." A new signal broke through the fleet's silence before anyone on Zarvok's bridge could stop it. A priority channel, old and half-corrupted, cutting into every open receiver in the formation at once. It did not belong to any of the ships still counted among the living. It was Admiral Vexaren's voice. He had not been aboard the flagship when it vanished. He had transferred to a forward runner an hour before the jump to inspect the picket line himself. The way he always did before a battle he expected to win easily. He had watched the Imperator's wrath disappear from a distance of less than a kilometer, close enough to see it happen and far enough to survive it, and he had said nothing to anyone since. "This is Vexaren," the voice said, thinner than Zarvok remembered it, the certainty gone out of it the way water leaves a cracked hull. "Report your status. Someone report your status." Zarvok stood very still for a moment before he answered. Command had been his, alone, for most of a day. He was not sure, hearing that voice, whether he was relieved to give it back. "Admiral, we hold position. We cannot jump. We have lost a third of the fleet without firing a shot or seeing an enemy ship." There was a long silence on the channel before Vexaren spoke again, and when he did, his voice had lost the last of its command and found something closer to disbelief. "That is not possible," he said. "They are a lesser civilization." Nobody on the channel corrected him. Nobody needed to. The silence did that on its own. At the conclave, word of the fleet's silence had finally reached the general chamber, no longer whispered between aides but spoken aloud from the floor. Delegates who had voted for the invasion without a second thought were now demanding answers nobody in the room could give them. Elder Theory sat through the noise without opening her eyes, the way she had sat through 287 years of being told she was wrong. Elder, the Council wants to know if you have any insight into what's happening in Sector 7 Omega. I told them generations ago that the humans were patient. Theory finally opened her eyes, and for the first time in longer than the aide had been alive. Tell them insight arrives on its own schedule now, whether they want it or not. Far above, Ambassador Helena Chen watched the same chamber feed from her relay station and allowed herself, finally. A different aide younger than the first approached her chair. There was no sorrow left in them, only something colder and more tired. They did not want insight then. One small and private thing. She picked up the framed photograph of her grandchildren, looked at it for a long moment, and set it back down facing outward instead of toward her, so that it looked out at the room instead of only at her. You'll get to grow up in a galaxy that finally listens, she said quietly. Even if it took this, back in Sector 7 Omega, Vexerin ordered every surviving ship to hold formation and wait, because waiting was the only order left that still felt like command. Zarvok related to what remained of the fleet and then stood alone at his station for a long moment, watching the gaps in the formation where friends and strangers alike had simply stopped being there. His pilot, still at her console, spoke again, quieter this time. Commander. Do you think they're going to let any of us go home? Zarvok did not answer right away. He thought of the small crystal Vexerin wore at his throat, of the long unbroken record of victories that crystal was supposed to guarantee, and of how none of it had mattered in the space of a single morning. I don't know, he finally said. I don't think that decision belongs to us anymore. Moments later, the last functioning long-range receiver on Zarvok's command ship picked up a single incoming transmission. Unencrypted, addressed to no one in particular and everyone at once. It carried no demands. It asked no questions. It was simply a countdown, and it had already begun. The countdown was not a threat. It was a courtesy. On Earth, Marchetti watched the numbers fall on her own display, matching the transmission ticking down inside every trapped Imperial ship. She lifted her cracked ceramic mug, drank the last of the coffee inside it, and set the empty mug down without a sound. She had never finished it before. She finished it now. Volkov, she said. When it reaches 0, do exactly what we built this for. Nothing more. Understood, Admiral. His voice did not shake. It hadn't shaken all day. Aboard Zarvok's command ship, the countdown reached its final second, and for one heartbeat, nothing happened at all. Then, across 2,847 ships that had crossed into the sector, 847 of them simply stopped being there. No blast, no fire, no wreckage tumbling through the dark. They went the way the flagship had gone. The way the Verona had gone. The way the scout squadron had gone. Only now it happened everywhere at once, across the whole trapped formation, in the space of 14 minutes, ship by ship by ship, until entire companies existed only as gaps in a tactical display that had nothing left to show. A young Torvani supply officer named Ressa, 3 decks below Zarvok's bridge, had spent the whole crossing writing letters home she never expected to need to send, one for every week she'd been gone, folded and numbered and kept in a drawer beside her bunk. She was writing the newest one when her ship folded out of the world around her, mid-sentence, the pen still in her hand. Nobody would ever find the letters. Nobody would ever know they had existed at all. Zarvok did not move from his chair. There was nothing left to order. His fleet, what remained of it, sat motionless around a formation that was now mostly empty space, and the silence on every channel was the kind that no rank could break. It was Vexerin who finally spoke, his voice raw over the open comm, no longer thin with disbelief but hollowed out entirely. How? He said. How is this possible? They are primitive. They have no fleet. They were never primitive, Admiral, Zarvok said. They were just quiet. The transmission is coming through on every civilian channel, Okonkwo reported. Back on Earth, her voice steady even as her hand finally stopped moving the chess piece altogether. The conclave is receiving it live. Every species in the galaxy is hearing this. Marchetti straightened her uniform, though no one on the far end would see it. She reset the watch on her wrist one more time out of habit rather than need, and looked at the display where the last of the Imperial fleet sat frozen and waiting. Begin transmission, she said. The broadcast reached every world within the conclave's chamber inside a minute, unrolling across every screen it owned. Marchetti appeared calm, gray-haired, her wedding ring catching the light the same way it always did in her own kitchen. She spoke slowly, without anger, for a little over a minute, and then she stopped. "You asked what happened to your supercarrier," she said. "The better question is why you thought it would survive. You called us primitive for generations. You called our patience weakness. You sent your fleet to take what you decided was already yours, and we let you cross the line so the whole galaxy would see exactly whose line it was. Your ship was not destroyed. It was removed, the same way every ship that follows it will be removed, for as long as it takes you to understand that some borders don't need to be defended loudly to be defended completely. The supercarrier was never meant to be seen," she said. "Only its absence. We are not conquerors. We never wanted to be, but we will not be taken either. There will be no invasion, there will be no war. There will only be silence. The same silence you dismissed 287 years ago, when someone tried to tell you the truth for free." She set the empty mug back on the table, though no camera had ever shown it to anyone. In the conclave chamber, delegates who had voted for the invasion sat in a silence none of them had a procedure for. Elder Theory did not speak. She did not need to. Every eye in the chamber that had once slid past her seat in the highest ring now found its way back to it, and stayed there. Beside her, the young aide who had brought her the reports finally asked the only question left. "Elder, what happens to Admiral Vexarin?" "He will not be executed," Theory said. "That would make him a martyr, and empires love martyrs more than victories. He will be recalled quietly and given a desk somewhere his crystal cannot help him. That is a worse fate for a man like him than any battle could have been." Aboard the drifting remains of his fleet, Vexaran unclipped the small crystal from his throat, looked at it for a long moment as if it belonged to someone else, and did not put it back on. The terms came from Earth within the hour, delivered not as a demand, but as a simple statement of fact. The surviving Imperial ships, what remained of the fleet, would be permitted to jump home once the field released them. Zarvok watched him do it and said nothing. There was nothing left to say that the silence hadn't already said better, on the understanding that no armed vessel would cross into Sector 7 Omega again without invitation. There was no threat attached to the terms. There did not need to be one. "They're letting us go," Zarvok said. When the message reached his console, "They were always going to let us go." Vexaran said, quieter now than Zarvok had ever heard him. "That was never the point. Being seen leaving was the point." Command of what remained of the fleet passed to Zarvok formally within the day, not because anyone celebrated it, but because there was no one else left standing who had held the line as long as he had. He accepted it the way he accepted everything now, without ceremony, and gave the order to prepare the surviving ships for the long jump home. Back at EDC Command, the room that had been holding its breath since before dawn finally allowed itself to exhale. Vance sat down for the first time in hours and looked, for a long moment, at the photograph of the Cascades still propped against his console, the mountains he'd grown up beneath and had spent most of his career hoping he'd never have to defend by force after all. "We didn't fire a single shot," he said, almost to himself. "That was the whole plan," Marchetti said. "Since before either of you were old enough to know it." Volkov finally let his shoulders drop, rubbing at the socket around his cybernetic eye one more time, the old habit surfacing now that there was nothing left to watch for. "Fields holding steady, Admiral. No degradation across the whole network. We could do this again tomorrow if we had to." "Let's hope we don't have to," Marchetti said. Cadet Priya Sharma poured the last of a fresh pot of instant coffee into her chipped mug, looked at the readiness board finally sitting quiet and green from end to end, and allowed herself, for the first time all day, to sit down. Sana Okonkwo finally set her grandmother's white bishop down at the center of the board instead of the edge, facing outward, and did not pick it up again. Sergeant Webb's unidentified contact, whatever it had been, powered down on its own within the hour and never woke again. One small mystery folding itself quietly back into the dark where it had waited so long before anyone needed it. Nobody in the room said out loud what everyone was thinking, that Sector 7 Omega could not be the only place a node like that one had been left sleeping, unlisted, uncounted, waiting for a war that might never reach it at all. Ambassador Helena Chen kept the photograph of her grandchildren turned outward on her desk after that morning, facing the door instead of her chair, so that anyone who walked in would see their faces before they saw hers. Elder Theory remained in her seat, in the highest ring, long after the chamber emptied, alone with the sound her own patience finally made when nobody needed it defended anymore. It was not triumph. It was closer to rest. Admiral Marchetti walked out onto the balcony of the command station as the sun came up properly over the coastline, still in yesterday's uniform. She reset the watch on her wrist, out of habit though it did not need it. Below her, on the tarmac, a ground crew was already rolling equipment back into storage, as if nothing unusual had happened at all, because to them, nothing had. Then she took the cracked ceramic mug from her pocket, set it down empty on the railing in front of her, and watched the first real light of the morning move slowly across its broken edge until the crack itself, for just a moment, disappeared into the glare.